On this week's episode of the Steam Deck podcast, we're talking about the cost of gaming in 2025. Are Steam Deck owners immune to the price increases that have been happening in the console space this year, or will we all be paying more sooner or later? What's up, Internet? You're tuning in episode 130 of the Steam Deck podcast, Slipscreen Games' weekly gaming podcast, all about Valve's portable PC powerhouse, the Steam Deck. I'm your host, Pete and Bessie, joined today by my very good friends and co-hosts, Mr. Stephen Radford.
Hello, hello.
And Mr. Max Wright.
Ahoy, ahoy, ahoy. That's the third ahoy. I didn't need to add.
It's an ahoy for each of us being reunited. Full steam ahead, boys.
Yeah.
Full steam ahead.
Yeah, welcome back to the
back
show.
in town.
And that's all I can sing of that before we'll get a copyright strike. So, Max, you came to the table with an idea today that I kind of can't stop thinking about now. I'm surprised it hadn't come up in conversation sooner, which is like, are we going to see a price increase for the Steam Deck? Right? Obviously, as of recording today, earlier today, Xbox announced that there's going to be a price increase for hardware, peripherals, and software. Like with the software side of things, kind of mirroring that $80 price point we've seen introduced with Nintendo Switch 2 games like Mario Kart. And, obviously PlayStation 5 has already had a price increase, a year, 2 years ago now, I can't quite remember. And then we also just had, price increases in some other regions most recently. And then there was also PS Plus getting a price hike. Obviously, there's been a lot of conversation about price increase on Nintendo Switch 2, not just at the base level for stuff like, the games, but then how like tariffs drove up the costs in North America. And it definitely begs the question of, at least in the United States, is the Steam Deck going to see this same situation start to affect it? And is Steam itself immune from, seeing games push that $80 price point?
Yeah. Can I quickly just start off with some context for what the price hikes look like for Xbox, so we can get an idea of, like, if there was to be an increase for the Steam Deck, what we're looking at here. So the Series S is going from $299, this is dollars, to $379. That's an $80 increase. The 1 terabyte model is going up to $429, and then the Xbox Series X 2 terabyte, the Galaxy Black, the big banging console, is now $730, which, if I'm correct, makes that more expensive than the PS5 Pro. Am I right about that?
Yeah, you are. Yeah.
Is that right? Yeah.
Which is crazy, right?
Especially when you consider like the conversation Steve and I had on the Flipscreen Games podcast, 2 months ago or whatever, about how like Xbox hardware is at a historic low. So for it to be getting a price increase is like, that feels like a real, death blow for the idea
What can
of
you
that
do
console.
about it though? Because like the tariffs are 145% at the moment on China in the US. So
Yeah.
increasing this worldwide kind of helps mitigate some of that. That's what analysts think happened with PlayStation, that they've done the increases in Europe and Asia and the Pacific region, so that they can mitigate their most lucrative market, which is the US, from getting hit with absolutely ridiculous priced devices. Because if the LCD Steam Deck is like $400, you're looking at paying $525 in tariffs on top of that. So that puts it at well over $1,000 for a Steam Deck.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I thought you were giving the total price then, not that'd be the price of the tariffs. But yeah, you're right. That is. I watched Gamers Nexus did a 3-hour-long video recently about where he went to visit loads of American computer part manufacturers. He went to visit Corsair. He went to visit Louis Rossmann. He went to visit case manufacturers, all sorts of people, and they are all just like, it's not worth us making and producing and selling these products in the US because the cost of we'd have to raise the cost by X amount. We're not going to sell it at that price, so we're going to lose money on everything we sell in America. So yeah, you're right. Yeah, I didn't even consider that would also be double the price, because we're not talking like $100 item here. We're talking a $400 item, and that's going to be even more.
Now, this is a question worth trying to answer, I think, because we know that at least some of, if not most of, Steam Decks are produced in China, but aren't there manufacturers in other, like, I thought there was maybe one in Taiwan. Wasn't there talk about opening one in the Oceanic region when they brought it to Australia?
They have produced all of them in China, so the manufacturing is in China. Some parts, if you go onto your Steam Deck, you can actually see where the parts in your device were created. There are some from Taiwan, some parts in there from Vietnam, some from I think Korea, because that's where the panels, Samsung makes the panels for the OLED model.
So, I mean, how realistic would it be to have an alternative, distribution, or not, I guess distribution, manufacturing location, similar to what we've seen Nintendo do with, like, the Nintendo Switch 2 units that have made it into the United States so far.
They came through Vietnam and Cambodia.
So it's a 10% tariff rather than a 145% one, which is obviously, that's something you could see Valve maybe just taking the hit, right?
Yeah, it's feasible. I know Asus have some of their devices produced in Taiwan, and they also have some produced in Mexico. So it could be that Valve spins up another manufacturing unit in one of those countries, and it's just like, right, these are just going to make them for the US, and the worldwide will continue to use our Chinese partners to make the devices. But that's a big thing to have to do. This isn't like Nintendo, where they're making millions and millions and millions of these. It's Valve. They're making a small amount of these relatively niche products, and it's, probably the profit margins on that $399 model are pretty slim, if none at all. And it's likely seen as a loss leader, that they sell you that so that you're in the Steam ecosystem. That goes away when, people are looking at it and it's like, this is even if you put the tariffs, like, I know at the moment, I think they're frozen at 10%. Is that still the case, or have they brought in now the tariffs?
That is the case for, I believe, I think it's a 90-day period for every country that's not China. So, like, we're still locked in at that 10% point for, I mean, like 2 months and change, right?
But then eventually, if say they move to Vietnam, that's a 46% tariff. Mexico, that's a 25% tariff. So there's still likely the case that, we probably will see a price increase on this, unless they're just going to bite the bullet and suck up that cost. But that's a huge hit to take. That's hundreds of dollars per unit.
If it's more than, like, say 10%, right, which is like, it's not nothing, but like 10% of that, $400 unit, right, is like, it's $40, right? Like, that's something that they can afford to swallow on a device that they know they will make money from you buying software on, right? Like, they have that direct line. And I think a point that we kind of, I think, danced around a little bit here, and it's one that Max highlighted in his notes that I think is worth highlighting more specifically here on the pod, is like, they don't have the same level of pressure to show, like, increased profit margins as a competitor, right? Like Nintendo, for example, as well, which is, I think, the other thing that could potentially mitigate by how much we see a price increase. I think I could see a world where Valve is not comfortable passing on 100% of that cost to the consumer, even if there is some price increase to, because to your point, right, they can't eat hundreds of dollars on every unit. They might be able to eat $100 or something like that, right? If there's data that bears out that people that buy a Steam Deck then buy a ton more games, and it's worth it to keep the supply lines open. I guess the other question is, like, do we see a period where you just can't buy a Steam Deck? Like, at least
I can see happening. Yeah, I mean, it could be that they run out of the stock that they've got in the US, because there's obviously there's some on soil, and then maybe after that they wait and see. And they wait and see if this trade war comes to an end, and they kind of wait it out.
That's the thing right now. It's not necessarily even that the tariffs are as high as they are as why people are unwilling to engage in it, or companies just worried about it. It's the not knowing. It's you can plan an entire production line around a certain number, And then a week later, Trump changes his mind and it's a different number. It's like, well, now we have to, there's too many ways down the line that we have to sort of change. And also, just to hop back to what you said about like moving manufacturing, that's not a quick job to just move a thing over, but also a factory. But also, if you think about a motherboard, this is an example that was in the video I mentioned earlier. If you think about a motherboard that's in the Steam Deck, that is going to be made up of thousands of parts, and they're not all going to be made in house. They're going to be, a company that just makes capacitors, a company that just makes the actual main board, a company that just makes the APUs. All these different little elements all come from different factories that, if it's made in China, are all very close together and don't need to be shipped around, and therefore you're only paying, a tariff on. If you move the production of the motherboard into the US, you then have to buy all those individual parts from China still, or all of those individual parts have to move over. So it just becomes unfeasible to actually, because it's not even just like you're moving one thing, it's you're having to move 100 things that all make specific things. A company that just makes the plastics, that just makes the buttons.
Now, I do think there is one potential saving grace that the Xbox and PlayStation and Switch aren't potentially privy to, and that is Trump's exemptions on smartphones and computers from the tariffs, and whether this is deemed as a computer, and if it is and not a handheld gaming device. But I don't know what it comes in as currently in the imports.
How would you argue that? Is it based on what you've marketed it as, or is that like someone would have to determine what that is? Because to the average person, they look at that and go, "That's a games console." But if and if you've marketed it as like, "Oh, this is like a games console," that's one thing. But if you actually break down what this is, it's like, "Oh no, this is just a Linux computer with a controller strapped to it," essentially. But at what point do the
I don't know. That's because I think you're right. I think it would be a tough argument to make to the uninitiated that it's not a games console. I mean, it is a video game console, right? Like, regardless of the fact that it's also a PC.
You're not really using it as a general compute device. Interesting as some of the people that wrote into that episode that we did, where someone was doing presentations at school.
Yeah,
and stuff
you
like
literally
that.
can do that, right? But it's not the purpose of the device.
Yes. Yeah. It's whether I can imagine that, if they are currently exempt to it, that at some point they wouldn't be. I don't think it's one of those things that will let slide for a while. But I guess at the moment that they're bringing it through as a computer. But
the
there are other
also
hardware, like there are other hardware, the Index, or the future new Steam Controller 2 or the Deckard. None of those would be exempt. Those are all considered electronic devices that aren't exempt.
There's a realistic chance that this dissuades them from releasing some of those products, I would say too. If it delays the plan significantly, if you are having to contend with that in one of your biggest markets, it's like that does become challenging to deal with, I think.
Yeah, and what about if you're getting parts into, let's say they're working on stuff still and they need the parts? Is that going to affect, because you're buying so few of them? It's not like you're mass producing these things so you can buy hundreds of them or thousands of them. If you're just like, or millions maybe, if you're just like, I'm buying some parts as the consumer to create prototypes and stuff, surely the price of that's going to go up as well, right? Like,
sure.
Even just being able to create and invent and work on new hardware, that's going to be too much, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's something like I've seen people in the modding community talk about, where it's like, if things don't change, there are a lot of it's similar to the comment you were making about motherboards, right? Where it's like there are entire types of things that are pretty much only developed in China, and there aren't other places in the world where they're manufactured on that same level at in the volume that would be necessary to maintain a steady supply in the way that there is one now, right? So it's it definitely there's a lot of questions that are tough to answer there, because it is so it is such a volatile situation, and it's to Steve's point earlier, right? Some of these companies could just hold out and wait and see what happens, and maybe the situation will become less volatile as pressure rises, and like we see some of these like in like 145% is obviously wild, right? So it's like that might get scaled back to a more reasonable number, like a 10% or like a 20%, which is something that you could justify even if it is a hindrance, right? It's something
I feel like
work your way around.
That's something you can justify passing on to the consumer as well. Like I feel like if it's gone from $400 due to market conditions, it's now 430, 440. People kind of accept that. They're just like, you know what? Yeah, we get it. We know what's happening. We understand what the market's like. In the same way that people still were buying PlayStations when they did the price hike a couple of years ago. They were still...
that was $30, wasn't it? Really, that was like a normal. That is like that's a shitter. But I also want to play a PlayStation. That's the price I have to pay. But if you're like priced out by it, if it's not the difference between you buying half a game or not buying half a game, it's the difference between you having a PlayStation and also being able to, I don't know, eat for 2 weeks or a month or whatever like that.
Whatever.
Yeah, exactly. That becomes, it's when, granted, gaming is a luxury, but it's always been a luxury that you can afford. You save up for the one console, and then maybe you just have PS Plus, or you just have Game Pass, or you only get games on sale, or you buy games secondhand, or you only pay free to play stuff, blah, 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 blah. But if the cost to entry for that, which the companies aren't making money on, because like you say, it's a loss leader, it's you get them in the door and then you just skim 30% off the top of everything. If you can't even get people through the door because they can't even afford to do the bit that is the I just have to stomach this. If that's outside of people's reach, how does anyone engage in this hobby? How does anyone, enjoy the luxury of this?
I think. Oh, please go ahead, Steve.
I was gonna say, I think PC gaming in general is just going to get more expensive, not just the Steam Deck. I hate to think what the GPU market's going to look like.
Just in the last year, so I build my own computer, and I build computers on the side as a thing. In the last year, I've gone from going £800. Yeah, I can do a good PC for £100 easy, to your budget's $1,000. I'll have a little look. I'll see what I can do for you. And then even then, you're like, I'd buy it right now if I were you. If you want to buy this, buy it immediately, because a couple of weeks ago, someone said, I want to build a PC. Here's my budget, £1,000. Cool. Put it together. 2 weeks later, they go, I'm ready to buy that now. And I'm like, that's going to be an extra £100, unfortunately, because GPU's gone up, the RAM's gone up, parts are just going up. And manufacturers, NVIDIA, are releasing new hardware that is more expensive than previous gen hardware, while also not really being that much better. Or they're releasing what used to be the 60 tier cards used to be lower end hardware, and now it's even lower end in terms like relatively. It's like an 8 gigabyte 5060 Ti they've just released is lower end than it should be at that in the current market, and yet it's costing £500 when that should be like a £250 card. How are you supposed to be able to, even at the low end, pick up a build yourself your first starter PC? You can't even really scrape together new parts anymore and build yourself something fun. It's all difficult and it's all too expensive, and it's that's where the Steam Deck comes in. I think for that, though, we've said this before about, is it worth buying? We had an episode about this. Is it worth buying a gaming PC right now, or is it worth just buying a Steam Deck? And I think the more things go up, and right now the Steam Deck being where it is still hasn't gone up just yet. Right now, I would say, just buy a Steam Deck. Save yourself a headache.
It depends what you want to play, because we'll get onto that in a bit. If there are some games you want to play, they're not playable on the Steam Deck. And I would have pointed people to consoles. I'd have been like, well, console seems to be the best value for money. But if we're getting to the point where they're getting up to over $700 for a console, it's getting to the point where it's just like, well, maybe it is better to build a PC, and then you can slowly upgrade it over time, and you've got the basis.
I guess the problem there, though, is that, to the point Max just made, the cost of that is also going up. So it's like it's proportional. It's like it's still probably the cheaper option in the long run, but that is still nearly twice as expensive as it used to be. Which is like
just mad.
Yeah, it's tough.
It's crazy.
I don't even know what I recommend at the moment.
I mean, I think it's really getting more and more case by case. I think I have a lot of follow-up questions for that person, because I think one of the things that we kind of brought up at the rip that I would love to transition to now for a minute is like the cost question too. right? Because I think one of the things that most PC players will hang their hat on in terms of like, yeah, like you spend more on hardware initially to build a gaming PC, but like you make that money back by being in the Steam ecosystem, and that games are a lot cheaper and sales are more frequent. And obviously there was like some resistance on among Steam releases to like push for that $70 price point. It's more common now. We were just talking about it before, before we started recording, and like Doom, right? Dark Ages is a $70 release. But I remember when Final Fantasy being the first one to do that was like, whoa, like, I don't know. And like, I mean, PlayStation still,
Rebirth.
I'm sorry.
Was it Rebirth that was 70? Was that the first one that was 70?
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
But and PlayStation still doesn't charge $70 for their games on PC, which is bizarre.
Yeah.
Right.
Considering they're the ones that were pushing for $70 games at the start of the PS5
Yeah.
era,
Totally.
And PlayStation being the cheapest of them all at the moment.
And like Steve always points out too that it's like, like you're literally, I'm spending like $10 more to buy your game on the console that I paid for, which is crazy.
Mm-hmm.
But
I think the fact that I wonder if games going up is a push to Game Pass in that regard, whereas the PS5 PS5 Pro may be cheaper than the top end Series X, and the PS5 exclusive is going to be cheaper than the Xbox exclusive, but Game Pass splits that cost across a year, and it's actually more than that now, isn't it? Game Pass has gone up.
Yeah,
but I wonder if that's like we need
Ultimate.
more subscriptions. So don't buy our games because they're $80. Get a Game Pass subscription. Sorry, I interrupted you there. Pete, go on.
No, you're good. Yeah, I think maybe, right? Like maybe that's part of the strategy is like software sales are already rough, so like let's double down on services. But I think it's kind of just, this is just what's happening, right? Like I think it's just we talked about it on all the shows, right? Back when the $70 price point was like a new thing, that in several regions, right, including America, right, which is like one of the largest markets, one of the largest purchasers of software, right, of video game software. The price of games hadn't gone up in 2 generations, and I think the jump to the $70 price point was an adjustment to like, this is the new status quo, and then the status quo changed, right, and inflation has gotten worse, and obviously now tariffs are influencing things. And I love to think that the $80 price point for some games is like, where the line stops. But it's like, I imagine we're not far off from a universe where that becomes
that'd be the standard.
A more and more standard price. Yeah.
Then there'll be the marquee titles that go above that, the GTA 6s, the Tears of the Kingdoms, that will be more than that. The deluxe versions, I mean, if that's the base cost, the deluxe version goes well over $100.
Right?
Yeah.
I am fascinated. I just really want to know how much GTA is going to cost in this landscape, and whether I want to see whether people pay it. I know people have been waiting for GTA. It's one of those like, even if you're not a gamer, you like GTA, but where's the line? And I want to know if
it's a once in a 3 generation game at this point, Max. Like,
Yeah.
I feel like they can get away with it.
I think the thing that's so wild about that though is like, I wonder where the tipping point is, and that becomes a diminishing returns thing. Because I think the point that Max made is like earlier is a really salient one about video games being, they're not a cheap hobby. Right? Like I think if you're like us, where you're like, oh, like I'm a gamer and I play, over 10 games a year, right? Like, yeah, you're spending a lot of money on entertainment, right? Like it is what it is. There's the upfront investment of hardware like we're talking about, but then even if you're just buying, 5 or 6 AAA games a year, you're spending several $100s on releases, right? So it's not cheap, but I think there's always been like a better bang for your buck value proposition when compared to almost anything else, right? Like you can get more hours of entertainment if that's how you're judging value, right? If it's like I only have so much money in my budget to go towards entertainment, right? Even during lean times, people need entertainment, right? And the entertainment industry doesn't dry up during lean times. It's like one of the few things people do continue to spend money on. And the idea that like, we've seen with Nintendo. We saw this with like the PlayStation Plus price increases, right? Where it's like it's a calculated thing of like, we're going to increase the price of this, and yes, we'll price some people out, but the people that are not priced out are spending more, and they continue to spend in the same amount that they are, like in a similar habit that they had, even though the price went up, because they want the product enough. And I wonder for something like GTA, right, which is like dollar for dollar, right, like the most successful individual thing, right, like it's made more money than any other like entertainment product ever released. I mean, how many of millions of those copies sold would maybe have not been sold if the price point is $100, and then when it's on sale, rather than being $30, it's $50, right? Like it's like I understand the math on how that makes sense in terms of like but I feel like there's a tipping point, right?
There is a tipping point. I mean, we've seen this demonstrated with like say the 3DS launch. That was a clear miscalculation. They had to pedal it back and do the ambassador edition and kind of like they had to correct it. We could see that happen. I feel like a push to $120 for the deluxe edition of GTA 6 with shark cards and all sorts of other junk that you get in the game. People would pay it easily.
I think by throwing in like a large amount of these shark cards. Let's say it launches online and they have that kind of currency. Obviously they will. But if you launch with like a huge chunk of that, it might seem like look at this value on this. It might be this much, but you also get this $30 worth of stuff that's not real.
I think you're right if it's the base game is $80. If the base game is $80, they'll have no trouble selling a $100 version of it. I think it's the idea that like, which
the
seems to be
$100.
Is that the base game will be $100, which I'm not, I'm not saying that I don't think there's a universe where that makes sense. Because I think like, and we've had this conversation multiple times, right? Like I'm not advocating for $100 price point, but I can't help but think that there are certain types of experiences, like something like Destiny, for example, or something like The Witcher 3, which was, a game that came out for $60, and then you got 2 additional, like basically full campaigns that just came out for free over time. Or something like a Destiny where it's like the expectation is that you're going to buy the game at a standard premium boxed price. You're going to play all the content that it has to offer, and then eventually they're going to sell you another expansion.
Yeah.
Like I could see a world where, the argument is that like, hey, like this is the next game in an established franchise, and we have a multiple-year roadmap for it. And rather than nickel and diming you every season or having a season pass model or doing microtransactions, we want to charge an upfront premium price so that you never have to deal with any of that, and you can just enjoy what the experience is. But there's a lot of questions then of like, are you going to get what you paid for? Are they going to deliver on that promise? Are they going to...
I think Rockstar will. Of anyone, them or Epic probably would be the 2 companies that I would trust to deliver
that could
on
get
their
away
promises.
with something like that. Yeah.
I could also see them doing the, it's $80 for the story mode. You get $100 for the story mode and GTA Online, and they kind of split it that way, and they kind of separate the product out because they started doing that later in the GTA lifespan. But do we think it's going to be, do you think PC players will pay it? Like we've seen the kind of disdain towards $70 on Steam, and I know a lot of people will never pay for a game at launch and they'll wait for the big Steam sales.
Literally some people will, but I guess that's the question, is like I kind of feel like it feels like a bridge too far. I already feel like the price point we're hitting now at $80 feels like a bridge too far to a lot of people. And, I think it remains to be seen whether or not that ends up being the case, right? Like, I think Mario Kart will be a very good test of that, considering what again, like in terms of most successful games of all time, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe is one of the most best-selling games of all time. So if, like, this game comes out and it far underperforms compared to that,
I mean, that game's costing me £30 because I was able to get the bundle, and I
Right.
feel like if people can get the bundle, that's what they're gonna do. Like that's
Yeah, but
the
I
best
mean,
way of getting that game.
sure, but I mean, we know that that's allegedly a limited edition offer, right? So it's like there comes a point where if it's going to compete with its predecessor in terms of number of copies sold, people are going to just have to accept that they're going to buy it at $80 because Nintendo games also rarely go on sale. Whereas, like, that's the thing with Steam, right? Whereas, like, does that $100 price point matter as much on a platform where you are conditioned that there will be 2 or 3 annual sales where you can almost definitely get it for what you perceive as a more reasonable price? So if GTA comes out at $100, but then in the Steam winter sale that year, I know like I'll be able to snag it for like $70 or $60 maybe, like, and maybe not that first year, maybe a couple years in, maybe but like.
I mean, that's how I always feel about Ubisoft games. Like, I very rarely buy a Ubisoft game at launch because I know within 3 months it's going to be cheaper. And if there's a game coming out around the same time from another publisher, I'll pick that one up and I'll double back and play the Ubisoft one. It happened last year with Star Wars. Star Wars was cheap by the time I got to holiday season because they'd had their launch and then Ubisoft just cut the price in half. But I feel like Rockstar will probably kind of keep it like Nintendo and
at least
stick
for a
with the price
while.
point. Yeah.
And I guess that's the question is like, is it a premium enough product to warrant that? And people are so attracted to it that it's like, I need to play it and it's worth spending 50% more than I spent on any other video game this year. But like, it's good enough that I don't care, or I'm so into the online and there's so much content because they've been developing it for 10 years that like you don't feel like that was a bad exchange, then like maybe that's a new status quo. But like I think that's a big if.
It feels like GTA is it's unfair to compare anything to GTA in some ways because of how successful GTA 5 is, and granted that's because it's the only one that's been out in 13 years. But GTA is by itself. GTA, like you said, GTA 5 being the best-selling or most profitable piece of media ever created. It's hard to sort of compare it to other games and say, oh, well, because people are not liking spending this much on this, they're not going to spend that on GTA. But can we even think about GTA as a video game or a piece of software in some ways? Because GTA is just a thing of itself. It's Grand Theft Auto. It is so successful and will continue to be successful. And I think it's so people want it so badly, they probably will pay whatever it costs.
Heard, but that is also a dangerous way of thinking, right? Like that is the same line of thinking that led PlayStation to think that they could charge an exorbitant amount of money on the PlayStation 3, and then that was a rude awakening that they had to pivot from, right? And it's not to say that you're wrong, but I think it's like pride cometh before the fall, right? Like it's like everyone thinks that a thing is this unshakable juggernaut until it has a bomb, right? And
so the only example I can think of that I would also consider to be like its own thing, like why are we even considering it, is Pokemon. Sure. Where Scarlet and Violet were at launch, awful performance. People were unhappy with the content of the game. There were loads of issues with that game. So much people were like, "Are Nintendo going to sort of say something? They're going to apologize." That is like one of the best-selling Pokemon games of all time. It doesn't need to be, and it was probably cost as much as other Switch games did. It's probably like a 60, possibly even, I don't know, what did it launch at? Remember what Scarlet?
It was
full price,
£60.
And yet it still sold very well despite all of that. It's like, and Pokemon is too big to fail. And granted, we or me specifically, maybe who doesn't actively engage with Pokemon much anymore, might look at that and go, "Oh, Pokemon, what a failure." But if you look at it from the point of view of Nintendo or Game Freak, who see, "Oh, this is our third best-selling Pokemon game of all time," is it? Great, let's just do more of that at that price. Win.
Sure, but again, right? Like, I was happy to dust off my history book and do a little history lesson here. Are we all familiar with the North American video game crash of the 1980s?
Yes, yes, we are.
That's how that happened, though, right? Is like video games are the biggest, hottest thing in the world, and they're like a growth industry and everybody wants to get in on it. And all you need to do is put out a video game and you will make money. And lo and behold, right? You have Quaker Oats making video games and shit like that. You have the notorious E.T. release, right? And what you end up, creating a market where like faith in the brand is shaken, right? And like to your point, or to maybe Steve's point about like Rockstar and quality, like I mean, there's every reason to believe that GTA 6 will come out and be sick and make a ton of money, right?
Just like table tennis did, it was a great game. We all loved it.
But I mean, just to play devil's advocate, right? I really enjoyed Red Dead Redemption 2. The reception of Red Dead Redemption 2 was a lot more mixed than Red Dead Redemption 1, right? It made more money, it sold more copies, but like, there was question about like, is this as good as the original? And there were quite a few people that like felt like it didn't quite hit. And
yeah, I agree with that.
Point being, right, like, and maybe that only supports your point that like maybe it's a less good game, but it made more money because it's a sequel.
It's also the 7th best-selling game of all time.
Right. But
what, Red Dead Redemption 2?
Sold 70 million copies, yeah.
Which is insane, right? And maybe that's enough. But again, it didn't cost $100. So it's like if the game isn't the second coming and people are already like, yo, fuck them for charging $100, they're going to be looking for reasons to say that it's not the second coming, even if it's okay, even if it's mostly very good, right? Like there will be people that have an axe to grind about that price point. And I don't know. I'm not saying any of this to say like, I think this is what's going to happen. It's more like, I wonder at what point, the squeeze is enough that people are just like, all right, like we're turning on you now. It doesn't matter like what the quality is. I'm not. We
did see some of that with like the Nintendo launch of all the announcements, right? Like people talking about how it's too much, how they were greedy, how this, that, and the other. And I feel like,
and now it's on track to be the best-selling.
Now it's on track to be the best-selling console of all time. It really is. It will remain to be seen as to whether $80 games make it onto Steam, whether developers are going to put them there, whether people are going to pay for it. I'm curious as to what happens with the Steam Deck, but one thing is for sure, I think at the moment, if you want a Steam Deck, if you want to get it at the price it's at now,
buy one now.
Is probably the time to buy it, just in case.
Yeah, stock could dry up, price could go up. Do you remember what I've said a few times before? Don't wait for the next thing because you'll never buy anything. I would say don't wait for like, oh, what if they do a Switch to blah, blah. I would say, yeah, if you're in any way interested and you're maybe someone who doesn't have the extra $500, whatever it's going to cost, I would say now's the time to bite that bullet.
Yeah.
And then enjoy all the things that we enjoy.
Definitely. All right, so for the back half of the show, Steve and Max are going to share some impressions on a new game they've been playing called Blue Prince that I've heard a lot of buzz about, and I'm excited to hear how you guys are getting on with it. But before we do that, a word from our sponsors. This episode was made with support from listeners like you on patreon.com/flipscreengames. If you enjoy our podcast, supporting us on Patreon will help us spend more time making content and get you access to Patreon exclusive perks like early access to ad-free versions of all of our podcasts, and exclusive content like the twice monthly After Dark podcast, where Steve and I will share funny personal stories, play games with each other, and more. And my daily Patreon show, The Daily Checkpoint, where every day I'll spend at least 10 minutes answering your questions or sharing my off-the-cuff thoughts on what I'm playing and what's going on in the video games industry. If you like what we do and want to go above and beyond to show your support, head over to patreon.com/flipscreengames today. And we're back. So talk to me about Blue Prince, boys.
Well, one thing's for sure, Pete. This one is right up your alley because it's on Game Pass, and that's all you've been playing this year. So you can
not on purpose, but yeah, I'm spending $0 on video games this year and just using Microsoft rewards points to get free Game Pass games.
They keep launching bangers on it. Who can blame anyone?
I know. I can't put it down. Okay, so that's cool.
Having said that, it works phenomenally on Steam Deck. I played it exclusively there, both handheld, and I played a little bit docked because I was playing with Henry, and he was helping guide me on what to do. Not that he was helping with
Fun.
the puzzles. He was just saying, go through this door, then go through this door. That's all. That's all I got.
Now, the only reason I didn't play it on Steam Deck ever, and I installed it on my Steam Deck first, fully intended on doing it. It was just when I thought about needing a notebook, which I thought I'll get a notebook anyway. The idea of having to put the console down, write on the notebook, put the console up, as opposed to just looking around with one hand, moving around with one hand while I write with the other, or just being able to very quickly move one hand away to write, was just so much more.
Oh, see, no, I was doing it on my phone. Like I've got a note section in my phone, like talking about, what the memos mean and how the puzzle in the billiard room works.
All right, hold on.
And things like that.
I'm going to play host for a second. Can y'all tell me what the game is?
Okay,
You're like, we're going to talk about blueprints and you're talking to me about notebooks. I have no idea. I don't pretend I know nothing. Pretend we're on a show. Pretend we're on a show where you're talking about the game and you might want to sell someone who's not heard of it on the game.
Steve, you explain. I'm going to get my notebook while you explain.
So basically, you are this dude who has, I think, inherited this mansion that you're going to, and there are 45 rooms in the mansion, and there is this rumored room 46. And in room 46, you've got to find out what's in there. And as you go through, it's a roguelike. You go through and you get 3 blueprints for each of the door you go in. So it might be like a bedroom, a storeroom, a nook, a hallway, a corridor.
Okay, wait. So the name of the game is Blueprints, not
Blueprints.
not like blue space prints?
No,
It's
that.
blue space prints.
Okay.
Do you know why
okay.
it's called that, Pete?
No, I don't.
Because you've been dead since 2016.
I have? Is this a dig or is this a...
No, Prince. No, Prince.
Oh, okay. All right. That was dark. I don't appreciate that.
Bring the tone down.
But you get a finite number of steps, and each step, you use a step when you go into a new room.
Okay.
And so, or when you go back into a room as well. So as you go into a room, anytime you change rooms, if you have to double back on yourself, you'll need to then use a step in order to do it.
Okay,
you can
so
get more
explain
steps.
to me
by,
finite steps. How, like...
You start off with like 30.
Yeah, 30.
30, 50, wherever it is. I think it's 50. You start
Yeah.
50 steps in a day, and then you walk into a room, you lose a step. You walk into another room, you lose a step. As you move between the rooms, each room you move between, you lose a step. So there's only a finite in a day. You can only move between 50 rooms
Gotcha, okay.
before you fall asleep on the spot, and then you wake
Yeah.
up the next morning and start again.
But you might find a piece of fruit. They'll give you some. You might go into the dining room, and if it's at level 8, you'll have a nice meal cooked for you. You might make a bedroom, which gives you extra steps. And you got to figure out how to do it. There are some rooms that give you like a debuff. Like if you go into the gymnasium, it'll take 5 steps off you. If you go into
The weights room.
yeah, and if you go into the church or the chapel, it'll take coins off you.
Yeah.
And you can you can get special rooms where you like exchange the coins that you've collected for items. There's loads of puzzles that you need to solve, and you're just trying to find out how to get into this room 46. And that's essentially what the game is. So every single room you go into, you open a door, you're presented with 3 options as to what you want that room to be. And some of them have 1 door, some of them can have up to 8 doors in the grand hall, and you have to figure out how to get through and navigate through the building to find out the secret of room 46.
Now, there's a term that I found out about last year called a Metroidvania, right? So it's Metroidvania game. You are finding items, they are powers, and you use those powers to open doors and find new secrets and things like that. Metroidvania, on the other hand, is a game like Tunic or The Outer Wilds, where your knowledge of the game and things that you learn are your powers. You already have your full arsenal from the beginning of the game, in theory. But as you play the game, you find something, or you have like an epiphany, and you go, "Oh yeah," and then you write that down in your notebook. And then when you go into a room or you spot something, you go, "Oh, I know what to do with this now because I saw that thing in another room that explains what I'm supposed to do." So you'd get into a room and go, "Oh, right, okay, I'm going to quickly flick through my notes that I've made. These are all my notes."
A good example that's not a spoiler. 1 second, I'm going to close my window.
The suspense is killing me.
A good example that's not a massive spoiler is you'll find a set of car keys. And to begin with, you might not know what to do with those car keys. I went all the way out of the house and I was looking around the sides of the house for a car to use these keys on. And then eventually, when you go down the west wing of the building, sometimes you get to architect a garage. And in the garage is a car, and you can use the car keys on that car. And inside the car, there's some things that you'll want, and you can use those to kind of continue navigating through the house.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a challenge and a balancing act of I need to get enough keys, I need to get enough coins, I need to figure out what types of rooms there are. You can unlock like things that are permanent additions to you. So for example, I can retain more coins now as I go through the building, and I can
Or have more steps
balance
at the start.
Yeah, or have more steps at the start. There's like loads of things that you can like kind of increase. You can unlock extra additional places in the building. There's like lots of things and lots of secrets and lots of things to find and puzzles to solve. It's a
Loads
really,
of
really cool
rooms,
game.
and you can also, it's sort of like Animal Well in where like you think you've solved like a small puzzle, but actually it turns out that's just one piece of a larger puzzle. It's also a piece of a larger puzzle, and there are, you know, puzzles that are just in rooms. You can obsess over. There's one puzzle that a friend of mine was obsessing over, and I'd already solved that. I'm not gonna. Fine, it was the secret garden. He was obsessed over. He was like, "This, the whole game is hinged around this secret garden puzzle." And I'd already solved that secret garden puzzle, and I was like, "Oh, see, now I can see how because it's like a game where you don't want anyone to tell you anything." I was like, "I'm not going to spoil anything for him. I'm not going to spoil it for him." But because he'd hinged his whole like everything about this game is around this secret garden puzzle, and I was thinking there are probably notes I've got in here where I'm like, I must solve this thing because it's going to solve everything. That actually might be fairly meaningless. Then there are also going to be things that I think are fairly...
to you about it, and you were like, "Oh no, I've not even had those two rooms spawn together in a run."
Yeah,
and like there's one puzzle where you need both of the rooms.
And there's a third room you need as well. I think is that no, yeah. So there's like if you have all three of these rooms, you can do a certain thing with those between those three rooms. It can get quite complicated, but see now we're getting onto my only real issue with the game, which is the RNG taking away. Like you might have this like intention or this great idea or like this like, oh my god, it's an epiphany, I've solved this thing, and then you run out of steps or you draw only dead ends, and then your game ends and you're like, okay, I've got to start this again, and then you will never see that combination of rooms again, or you'll.
I got so close now because I've still not got into room 46.
Oh, have you not? No, I see.
So I'm still figuring it out, and I came so close. I'd unlocked the door to the antechamber, and I was ready to go in, and then I spawned a room right at the end that was a dead fucking end, and I wanted to just launch my Steam Deck across the room.
It's so frustrating, and also like, so I think I haven't actually been able to fully because I've only know 2 other people, maybe 3 other people that have actually opened up Room 46 and sort of rolled credits on the game, let's say. And I think there are drastically different ways that you can achieve that. I think that it's not just the way that you might be trying to do it might actually be different from the way that I try to do it. Because I remember saying like, "Oh, did you go into here? When did you find this?" And he'd be like, "What are you talking about?"
I found 2 ways. I found 2 because I've managed to unlock 2 of the doors so far.
Okay.
Chamber.
I'm not even talking about that. There's a bit beyond that.
Oh, okay. Wow.
Where I'm like, oh, so I went down there and went down there, and he's like, what's down there? I was like, well, you had to have gone down there to have done this, and he's like, no, I went down here. I'm like, oh my god, didn't even go down. This isn't great radio really, but like you might think that you've stumbled upon the answer to the puzzle, but that's one answer to the puzzle because there are like 4 different routes, and I'm just like, I'm fascinated by the idea of like the game guiding you in a path and you thinking that that's the only way, but actually there's just like so many different ways, and you just have tunnel vision that you think you cracked it, but actually you've just cracked one of the ways, and it might even be way simpler than any of us are giving anyone like giving the guy credit for that made it. But it could just be that because we're like, don't spoil it, don't look it up, don't blah blah blah, we think that we are it's nice having a solo experience in a game like this where you are just working out for yourself and not. It reminds me of when I played Ultros last year, and because it was for review, I had to work out how to connect with those plants entirely by myself, and it was so rewarding doing that. And Blueprints gives a lot of that, like, oh, I've done this, and I might be the only person to have ever discovered this because I'm not going to talk about it with my friends,
Yeah, Pete, you'd really like it. You really would.
You
Like,
really
if you
would.
can find the time or you have the energy to go into one of these games where, you might be getting an in-game magnifying glass to look at newspaper clippings to find specific things. If you can, if you're in the mood for that kind of thing, this is, I think, a really special game.
It sounds really cool. It definitely sounds like very unique and like a very interesting way to like explore the story and like I like unraveling a mystery, for sure. Yeah, I'll have to give it a shot.
Yeah, and maybe we have a catch up, and hopefully I've got to Room 46 by then. Max has already finished the game. Obviously, he's the
Yeah.
only true gamer among us.
Tastemaker, mate. Number one tastemaker. I do. It's one of those things where like I keep having this pull of like maybe I'll go back and try and solve another puzzle, but because I don't know if that puzzle is going to be something big or just something that's going to open up like even more, layers and layers and layers. Like I'm like, oh, can we bother to dedicate another 20 hours to this game when half that time is going to be me desperately trying to think about, get to what I think I've written down as the solution here, only to find out that it's not that, and actually that's meaningless. And I was maybe just, I don't know. It's just if I could just endlessly explore and do these things and try again, like in Outer Wilds, for example, if I died in Outer Wilds, I'd be like, cool, that was only 20 minutes of my time. I don't have to hope that something turns up because I can just get in my spaceship and shoot off and go there immediately. Whereas, be like the rooms that you mentioned earlier, having to try and spawn that room and that room. And then I think you have to get them oriented right as well. It's all a bit like that's too much. And the randomness takes away from that. Everything else about the game, fantastic. I think it looks great. It sounds great. There's a great puzzles, great mystery. It's just like let me play the game sometimes,
I can understand that. Yeah, like the randomization does annoy things sometimes, but I think that's part of it and a roguelike. Personally, I think
It is.
you have
It
to have
is.
that.
It is.
And I guess it does like preserve replayability, right? Because like you could play it more than once and not have the exact same solution every time.
Yeah, I guess so. But once you sort of like know, once you know the answers, like I say, now you're
True.
armed with that. But I need to get from here to here, and I know exactly where to find how to open this and how to do that and what the puzzle is here.
Yeah, to some extent, but like you might not get that room, and you might get the other one, and you might have to then sort of solve that puzzle, and
That's
it
true.
might change the ending depending on there's so many factors in there that, like P said, no one run's ever going to be the same. Like you're always going to have a different time. You're always going to find different things, and it's how you kind of choose to play it in that period of time. Like you might end up getting frustrated, or you might find out a new secret. And but I could easily see them expanding this with some DLC at some point as well.
Well, rolling credits, opening Room 46, I think is like one of those like, oh, you've just scratched the surface, baby. Like oh, you found Room 46? Cool. Here's a load of other stuff you now need to do now that you've done this. I think there's even like puzzles in the game that you can only ever get a portion of it by playing.
Oh, like end game stuff. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, like Animal Well, I guess, where like there were puzzles that there's a message in the game that's like this might be months away, this might be years away from when I released the game, and it was like 3 days in because everyone had just like put their heads together straight away and found the answers. I think once I'm far enough removed from this that I don't feel that pull of like, oh, maybe I'll give it a go. I do think I will just look up all the different things, and I think I'll be fascinating to see how much of the stuff I've got in here is correct or important, or how close I got to some of these massive puzzles. But Pete, I definitely recommend having a notebook for this because you will want to draw notes. You'll draw the same grid. I've drawn the same grid like 5 times because it's the grid of the house, and I'm like, I need to know exactly where certain things. I need to keep track of this.
X marks the spot, Max.
X does mark the spot.
Yeah, I'll definitely keep that in mind. If I start it up, I'll grab one of my Moleskine notebooks. Cool. All right, gang. Well, if you want to let us know what you think about the potential of a price hike on the Steam Deck or games in general getting a price increase on the Steam storefront, let us know in the comments down below. And of course, if you have played Blueprints or Go check it out after this episode. You can let us know, I guess, about your thoughts about that in all the same ways. Head over to flipscreen.games. That's our website where you'll find links to all the places we are all over the web and all the ways that you can get involved or write into the show. And then, of course, I want to extend a very special thank you to our Patreon producers for the month of May. Now, they are Arnold J. Rimmer, Christopher Valenz, Gabriel Hasselmeyer, a.k.a. Sobe, Project Julian, Steve Stompy, Susan Still Likes Cats and Also Boobies, Voodoo Vic, That One Kid Nick, Ty the Dude, and Waka Hula. Thank you all so much for your support over on patreon.com/flipscreengames. Y'all the reals to the real, and we greatly appreciate your support of this and all of our sister shows. If you want to go check out those shows, Nintendo Noise and the Flipscreen Games podcast, or if you want to get involved in all the cool things that we're doing, like I said, flipscreen.games is the website. Head over there and click on some stuff. However you choose to do so, thank you for joining us for another episode of the Steam Deck Podcast. For the crew, I've been Pete. He's been, I did it backwards. He's been Steve. He's been Max. We'll see you next week.